Hello again, and I'm Lisa von Drasek, the curator of the Children's Literature Research Collections of the University of Minnesota Archives. And today we've asked
Jan Fransen. I'm the service lead for Research Information Management at the University of Minnesota.
And we sort of said, bring something that would be good for summer reading, but I brought us
a book called I'll Be Gone in the Dark. And it isn't exactly what I think you meant by summer read. You know, It is not light at all, but it's a good read for this summer.
Can you read the whole title and the author's name?
Sure. I'll Be Gone in the Dark, One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer by Michelle McNamara.
And how did you end up reading this book?
Well, you know, I would never have picked this book up. I was aware of it because I knew who Michelle McNamara was. She has a famous husband.
And who is he?
His name is Patton Oswalt, and I was familiar with his work. I was not familiar with hers because, again, I'm not really a true crime kind of person. I don't read a lot of that. But she has a history of being very involved with exploring different cases that are unsolved, and had a strong interest in that, ran a blog about it, and had been researching this story for a very long time. So towards the end of her writing of the book, unfortunately, she passed away. So the book was completed by one of her researchers and a couple of other people, and her husband, who completed the book and published it recently. And then about a week after my book group finished discussing this book, the killer was caught.
Wow.
So that just happened. It's been in the news. You may have seen it. DNA evidence.
But you were saying that you were reluctant to read this book because of...
I was. I find it creepy, you know, and I particularly, this one, while I was reading it, I found it very uncomfortable because I knew that, I didn't know the whole story, but I knew that there was no end. I knew it was unresolved. I think I would read it very differently now. I think... I'm not saying I wouldn't have had nightmares, but I think I would read it differently now, knowing that there is, although of course the case hasn't gone to trial or anything like that, there is a resolution now in that way, in the way you usually look for in this sort of story. So yeah.
And so what was your book group discussion like?
You know, it was great. This often happens with books we're a little uncomfortable with. My book group has a rule: whoever hosts picks the book, and nobody is supposed to question that, and nobody tries to, we may question it, but we're not supposed to try to talk them out of it or anything like that. This is what we read, which has been great. I read things that I never would have picked up, including this. And very often the books that we, as we're reading it, go, oh my gosh, I can't wait to be done, are the best discussion books. And this one had so much depth because it was not just about the terrible crimes that happened and the victims of those crimes and the survivors, which was, you know, is of course riveting and horrifying. But also about the tenacity of the author, of the people who had worked trying to solve this crime, and were still working, many of them like in retirement or came in maybe after.
What is the time period that these incidents happened?
I believe the first, I'd have to look for sure, but I believe the first one was in 1976 and the last one in 1986.
So a large span of years that people had police officers and detectives, that was their job, and then they retired?
Yeah.
Ah.
Well, and interesting too, there were actually two different sets of crimes, one in the Sacramento area and one more in Southern California, and they weren't tied together until much later. There were people who suspected that it might be the same person, but because of the point in time when these crimes happened, DNA evidence wasn't a thing. So it was later when they were able to go back and use the DNA to see that those two sets of crimes matched each other,
that they were
and tie more together. So, and it was in fact the DNA in the end that led to his capture.
So I'm kind of dying to know, what's the next book from your book group?
I knew you were going to ask it, so I wrote on a post-it. Somehow my friend Cricket thinks that in the summer we have time to read 2 books. So I have not started either of them yet. One is Gumption by Nick Offerman.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I know him. I don't know this book. So
he's an actor, Parks and Recreation.
Parks and Recreation.
Okay,
yes.
So an actor memoir.
I don't think it's a memoir.
Okay.
He's written several books, so I don't think it's that. And then the other one, also a book I had not heard of, maybe you have, called Hannah Coulter by William Barry.
I know nothing about this.
Oh,
Do you
well,
know?
maybe I'll come back and talk about that.
Well, that would be great. Thank you for joining us
Thank you,
on
Lynn.
Read This Book.